All right, I hope you guys are ready for a demonstration. I know I am. We're going to take that same Sargent painting, and I'm going to show you step by step how you can use the tools and processes we've learned so far to paint even this masterpiece. My first step is to begin tracing out those shapes, just like we did previous to this, to give me a starting point. Now, before anyone calls the art police on me, this is a demonstration of how you can compartmentalize each thought process into its own stage. This is not a demonstration of my own portrait process. I will be doing another demonstration right after this where I do not trace, okay? But I'm showing you here, I'm pulling out all those same shapes we just saw to give me a starting point. I want to show you how you can think of shapes, then values, and then edges in order to create a very sophisticated portrait, okay? Like I've been doing this whole week, I'm first establishing the kind of fence line between light and shadow, getting some basic average light, average shadow shapes in there. Then I'll start breaking that down to halftones. There is, of course, some local value differences in this painting. There are 3 or 4. The skin is one local value. His beard is a darker local value. His lapel is a light local value, and his suit jacket is a very dark local value. This shape here is the average shadow of the eye socket, which includes, remember, includes the entire eyeball form. Beautiful shape where he's melted everything together. And you'll notice as I show you my layers here, how it's actually starting to look like a head, just with 3 different shapes there. Now I'll start selecting out the average light of the beard. Again, this is a darker local value, so it gets its own 5 value consideration, right? So I'm starting with the average light. It's a shape that looks like that. Again, notice how I'm using the pen tool, which only lets me draw kind of basic shapes. It encourages me to draw C-curves, S-curves, and straights. That's what the pen tool is very good at. So it's a very choice tool to do this kind of exercise. And that's what this is, guys. This is an exercise of compartmentalizing these processes, okay? And then from here, I'll show you how we can take this and do a portrait in a more fluid process. So I'm getting the shadow side of the beard. The beard has a very complex series of shapes that make up its form, because it's a beard. Hair is always a little bit more unpredictable, right? It's got different kinds of planes to it, different facets. But these are all average shadow. And now that I've got that step done, the first thing I want to show you is if I zoom way out on both pictures, you notice how essentially it's the same painting. The edges are just extra, okay? The shapes themselves do the heavy lifting. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to the edges part of the process, where I'm going to take all the shapes, they're all blended down to one layer, I merged everything, and I'm just going to paint edges. I'm just going to work the hard, firm, soft, and lost edges between every shape that I've done. And I'm going to show you by the end of this how I'll have almost an exact replica of the Sargent. Just by breaking down my process into shapes of 5 values and then edges, the edge work in between them. And again, edge work is just, it's not blending, guys. It might look like blending, but I'm trying to understand how these planes turn, how the form works, and then I will assign a variety of, hard, firm, soft, and lost edges accordingly, okay? It's not just mindless blending. And that's what I think a lot of us can fall into, that trap of just kind of mindlessly blending things. There still is a very purposeful decision-making process to be had here. Here's a shape I actually missed, a little halftone shape underneath the cheekbone. So I'll throw that in there, and then I'll continue working. Yeah, so this is how I would paint a portrait. Of course, I wouldn't trace the shapes. I would draw the shapes myself. And like I say, I'll do a portrait demo right after this where I don't trace. But that's what I would do. I would get these shapes in there kind of first, or at least I would think that way first. And then I would compartmentalize that into its own stage, and then I would start working the edge. And I'm using the smudge tool largely with the finger painting option turned on in Photoshop. So I'm kind of sampling the value that's there, and then just using that smudge tool. I'll use a brush as well. You just saw me with, I have a kind of a hair kind of brush out right now. I'm kind of tackling, let's say, soft to firm edges first, getting my feet wet that way. But later on, I'll begin to do some heavy lost edges. I'm noticing like where the hair blends into the background in the Sargent painting is completely lost. And also where the background blends into his jacket. These are lost edges that I'll get to. But for now, I'm just trying to work some subtle softness. Lost edges are where you can have fun. Soft edges and firm edges need to be carefully controlled because there are subtle differences between them. So you notice here, this is what I'm doing. I'm comparing one edge to the next. I'm asking myself, okay, how hard is the hardest edge in this painting, and where is that edge? And then how soft or firm are other edges in comparison? So I'm not looking at any one piece in isolation. I'm actually looking at them all together. So I consider a hard edge, let's look at where a hard edge is, maybe on Sargent's left eye, where the eye socket is, kind of where the eye socket meets the brow. It's a bit of a hard edge there. And you notice in my painting, I've replicated that hard edge by kind of leaving it as the digital hard edge that I initially cut out. And then it softens from there as it tapers down until kind of the bag under the eye, it gets much softer. Okay, so one shape can have many different varieties of edge in the same shape. This is where edge work becomes complicated. And also where shapes, this is where you can actually compromise your shapes accidentally. But when you do too much edge work, you can actually make your shapes like distended, or you can cut into them too much. And I've shown you that a little bit before. You got to make sure, guys, that you maintain the veracity of your shapes. You do these shapes for a reason. You got to stick to them. So when I'm doing my edges, I'm very cognizant of not destroying my beautiful shapes, okay? Because the shapes are what do the heavy lifting. The edges are ancillary, secondary to the shape. So this is all just academic stuff. I'm just plugging in different edges. You're looking at this video at about 2.5 times sped up. But you can see just with the smudge tool, doing most of this work, probably 90% of the edge work, just with the smudge tool. Because I had all the values and shapes laid in, you know, I could just grab the edge, this smudge tool, and just work the edge. So here's some lost edges. Notice I'm using that smudge tool to make no difference between the background and the hair and the background and the jacket. And also notice when I do that, I'm starting to enter into that realm of poetry where I am kind of giving things meaning by taking things away. So I'm actually becoming less literal. I'm not literally showing you where the hair meets the background. And that adds this sense of, like I say, poetry to the thing where, you know, it just takes on a little more meaning when I involve you, the viewer, in the understanding of this piece. And lost edges are a great way of doing that. Okay. Notice how you also play with lost and found when you have edges. So if you look at the hair is lost on like the right part of the painting, or if you look at the jacket, actually, it's kind of lost on the right side of the painting, but on the left side, Sargent has shown you where its edge is. And he's actually shown it to you with a fairly firm edge, or like a hard edge. So he's kind of played with this duality of lost and found. Just like how in shapes, you can play with simple and complex, okay? You can have large shapes be very simple, or maybe small shapes are very simple and large shapes are complex. You can play with this kind of back and forth between the two concepts of simple and complex. But even still, guys, remember I said earlier, even your complex decisions need to be designed. So like, you know, a lost edge needs to be designed well. I can't just lose every edge. The painting would turn into mud. Just like in shapes, you can't have complex shapes everywhere. The painting would become unreadable. So you have simple versus complex, and you choose your complex shapes accordingly. One way of doing it is like I showed you with the Sean Galloway image. He chose to have a complex shape that takes up a large area of the painting. If you remember, the character's pants had that complex shape. It took up a large portion of the character, so maybe he had a little more capital to play with a complex shape. Whereas in a small shape, like the highlight on the cheekbone in this painting, let's keep that shape simple because it is a small part of this painting, so no need to clutter up a small part of the painting with a complex shape. So as you see at this stage, I'm really getting into a sophisticated looking painting, right? It's coming very close to the original. And I've only been working on it for maybe 20 minutes of real time. And just like that, we have our finished study. It's amazing how simple these processes are, but when you combine them, look at the result. Looking back at our original shape version, let's do a slow fade here, and you notice those shapes remain intact. Let's do that one more time. Here are the shapes. Now watch closely. We do a slow fade and take a look at how those shapes are not really changing. The only thing that's changed is the edge that connects all the shapes, adding so much more variety. Okay, let's move on to another portrait demonstration.